Her entire life, Carolina was treated as the useless disgrace of a legendary ducal family. Her older sister possessed powerful holy magic. Everyone believed she would become the next saint, and Carolina was blamed for their mother's death. Then, without warning, Carolina is chosen as a sacrificial bride for the Empire's most feared warrior, a ruthless prince known for slaughtering anyone who stands in its way. Expecting a cruel and miserable future, she leaves everything behind without resistance. But the so-called bloodthirsty prince is nothing like the monster she imagined. And when their journey is attacked, Carolina awakens a mysterious power that should be impossible for someone with no magic. The girl everyone called worthless may have been the true miracle all along. A young girl frantically chases, trying to keep up with her big sister. The young girl trips, and the big sister comes back to say, "My goodness, you're such a klutz." Our heroine, Carolina Sanchez, awakens, gasping from her nightmare. The Sanchez family is the only dollhouse in the kingdom of Celestia, and their house name has decorated the kingdom's history. At one point, producing the strongest knight, and at another, the prime minister to uphold the nation. No matter the era, the Duke of House Sanchez has been the beacon of hope to the country. And to this glorious house, two girls were born. Unlike her brilliant sister, Flora, Carolina was ordinary and possessed no special talents, a considered disgrace to the Sanchez name. Despite all the knights sacrificed, Carolina could never reach Flora's abilities. As the Duke's second daughter, she's long wished for one thing, a single talent she could be proud of. The bar room was lively and full of guests. The people couldn't help but comment on Flora, looking as beautiful as ever today. Carolina stood alone with a somber look, feeling inadequate as always. Then spotted a blonde woman injured, her partner saying she seemed to trip while dancing. Her mother was concerned about her bruised face, another man calling for a doctor. However, Flora said that would not be necessary. She'd healed the bruise. Flora told them not to fret, and a single prayer made light emanate from her, making the wound vanish. The mother and daughter were joyous and relief, and with everyone witnessing Flora's holy magic, all bets were on with her winning the next saintly trials with ease. Saint is a title specific to the kingdom of Celestia, bestowed upon she who possesses exceptional holy magic. As everyone said, Carolina also felt the next saint would surely be Flora. A girl complimented Flora while also downplaying Carolina, but Flora would politely ask them to refrain from teasing her little sister so much. She told them Carolina was very sensitive. The girls began to feel bad, but it was all right. Flora told them they'd all apologize to her together. The two randoms bowed, apologizing, saying sorry for their rudeness, and Flora as well. She just wanted Carolina to forgive them. With a saddened face, Carolina did just that, and Flora was pleased everyone made up. But Flora would whisper, "It must hurt to hear the truth, doesn't it?" right into Carolina's ear. She went on about how Carolina was House Sanchez's only disgrace, then laughed in front of everyone while thanking Carolina for taking on the supporting role. On the carriage ride out, Flora scolded Carolina, asking about the look on her face. Carolina meekly replied, "Nothing in particular." And Flora nagged on that if their father didn't have important business, she wouldn't even be sharing a carriage with her. But since this was the only one at their disposal, she had no choice but to let Carolina ride along with her. She told Carolina a disgrace like her should be grateful to even be allowed to share the same space as the saint-to-be. With the silence, now Flora was complaining and telling Carolina to say something, asking her if disgraces know nothing of manners around their betters. Ben went on to say Carolina wasn't like the rest of them. Her hair wasn't like Flora's or their father's, not even like their mother's proud raven locks. It was gray, as if covered in dust. Flora blew on her hair to emphasize the dust effect. Flora is an example of a person who can't be human. Flora pointed out Carolina's blood-red eyes, saying they were nothing like their mother's pale pink, nor did they bear resemblance to their father's green eyes. She almost wondered if Carolina was really her little sister. Some say Carolina was a spitting image of the late Duchess, but Flora was sure they were just being sarcastic. There's no way a disgrace like her could be anything like their beautiful mother. Everything Flora said was like a knife to Carolina's chest. In her heart, she pleaded for Flora to stop, to not say another word. She told Flora if she's done her wrong in any way, she'd apologize. But Flora just snapped her fan and began to speak the words Carolina couldn't bear to hear. Carolina never got to meet their late mother, Duchess Karen Sanchez, because she passed away from illness shortly after giving birth to her. The childbirth was undoubtedly the cause of her decline. If she'd never been born, their mother might still be alive. Flora continued saying their mother was a wonderful person, kind and compassionate, as if she were the Holy Mother. That's why Flora would never forgive Carolina for killing her and refused to accept her as a spitting image. She rejected Carolina with every fiber of her being. Exiting the carriage, the butler told Carolina her father was waiting for her in the drawing room. There, she graced herself before His Majesty, King Nathan, sitting beside her father. But the king shushed her. He was here on private business. They exchanged pleasantries, and Nathan asked if she had a lover or partner of any kind at the moment. Her father asked him to leave out the small talk and get to business. But Nathan assured him this wasn't small talk. He stood up and began to explain why he was here. The deadline for formalizing their broad-based alliance was approaching fast. Unfortunately, one of their own has slighted a duchess of the Malcosian Empire. Said duchess happened to be the reigning emperor's younger sister, so they wouldn't take that lying down. Under normal circumstances, Nathan would be facing some sort of sanction. But an envoy from the empire arrived just the other day and presented a proposal. They were to provide a wife to the second prince of the Malcosian Empire. Carolina knew the second prince of Malcosius was Edward Ruby Martinez, the founder and commander of the Piebborn Knights, exceptionally gifted with both sword and magic. He's distinguished himself through countless battles and made a name for his order throughout the world. However, he's never been hailed a hero because he was cruel. He'd strike down anyone, even women and children. He's feared by the people as a man devoid of blood and tears. They call him the bloodthirsty prince. Nathan was troubled having to choose a bride for him soon, and he had to select a noble woman of the highest status within their country. His own daughter was already promised to someone, and the nation could not afford to send Flora because she was the candidate as the next saint. Carolina resigned herself to this fate. Many could replace her, but no one could replace Flora, and so Nathan made one final request to her for the sake of their country. He asked that she marry the second prince of the Malcosian Empire. She accepted no resistance whatsoever. After the king left, Carolina's father came up to her asking if she had any doubts about marrying Prince Edward. If so, he'd persuade the king to scrap this plan. She answered, "This country would come to ruin if she refused," and he cut her off. He knew that, but he could not stand by and watch as his daughter married off to another country like a sacrificial offering. She was his darling little girl. She couldn't believe what he was saying. She always thought she was unloved since she was a disgrace, unworthy of anything. Her father said, "That's ridiculous," and asked, "Who said that?" embracing her closely. She was so happy though, accepting this marriage without reservation. If this would serve the kingdom of Celestia and she could be of use to their house, it would be the greatest honor. He smiled, thinking she was just like her mother in that respect. She was surprised as he went on to say she was just like Karen, the way she was so hard on herself, yet kind to others, the way she never spared any effort. He thought she was her spitting image. Carolina asked to hear more about her mother, and they talked about her all through the night, about how she, with persistent effort, was able to beat him in chess once, about how delicious the late-night snacks she secretly made were, about how hardworking and serious she was. Yet on occasion, she would prank him and give him a hard time. How she loved going out to pick flowers with the floor, and the fact that right up to the very moment of her death, she never once harbored resentment toward anyone, as if showing off a precious treasure. He carefully conveyed his memories of her with each and every word. Iris, a maid, would stop outside overhearing their giggling. She then went to Flora and reported what she heard about Carolina. Visiting Karen's grave on another day with her father, Carolina took notice of the bouquet he was holding. Blue hestants meant unchanging love, and white meant modest love. Despite how he seemed, her father was surprisingly romantic. They kneel, and he said, "Karen, it's been almost 16 years since you left this world, and yet I still can't get used to a life without you. When it dawns on me, I find myself looking for traces of you." Carolina looked at him in surprise. She spoke next. "It's been a while, Mother. Thanks to the resilience you passed on to me in birth, I'm doing great. Being healthy is my only merit, but I'm actually getting married. Tomorrow, I depart for the Malcosian Empire. Mother, I believe today will be the last I'm able to visit your grave, so please allow me to ask you one final thing. Mother, are you glad you gave birth to me?" Her father was taken aback by that question, but she continued, "The nobles of the kingdom of Celestia call me the Sanchez family. Disgrace. I lack brilliance of mind and any talent whatsoever, and to make matters worse, I was the cause of your demise, Mother." She wept, asking, "Have you ever wished that you never gave birth to an embarrassment like me?" Her father said that was enough, and Carolina apologized. But that said, she had no regrets herself. A light breeze blew, and she told her mother she wouldn't run from her fate any longer. While packing her things that evening, Flora burst into her room, saying she heard the news. Carolina ignored her sister's taunts about how she was being married as a sacrificial offering, and and her saying no matter where she went, no one, not even a bloodthirsty prince, would ever love a disgrace like her. A relief to Carolina in a way because she'd never have to see Flora again. Carolina wept with smiles at her exit carriage, thanking her father for everything, all while Flores scowled, watching them from the window above. The Duke embraced his daughter, telling her he was so proud of her, and he began to cry as well. He told her she needn't be special or the best, but to simply live a happy, healthy life. That's all he wished for. She stared through the night, watching as she left her father behind. And eventually, the dawn would rise, as her driver told her they'd be reaching their location soon. This location is where the Pieborn awaited her. Since she was traveling in secret, the plan was to rendezvous with the returning Night Order and to enter the Empire together. That way, no one would be suspicious. Given they've just returned from an expedition, there were certainly a lot of troops. From this point on, she'd proceed to the Empire on her own without even a maid or a bodyguard to accompany her. Daunting, but she graced herself before the Pieborn Knights. And from them arose the intimidating commander and bloodthirsty prince, Edward Ruby Martinez, standing dauntingly before Carolina. Edward told her she was not past the promised time, so there was no need to apologize to them. Since they'd be together a long time, he asked for her companionship, extending his hand to her. Carolina thought there might not be any particularly deep meaning behind his handshake. She got the sense he was treating her as an equal, but once he shook her, she squealed in pain. The handshake was quite firm. Edward apologized, saying he didn't know his own strength, then let her know she'd be riding in the carriage with him, and she thanked him for his consideration. Teodor Garcia interrupted them, asking how long they'd keep shaking hands. He introduced himself as Edward's assistant. Carolina heard about him. Teodor was the second son of a Viscount and the vice commander of the Night Order. He's lauded for his outstanding brilliance and genius with magic. Despite his kind smile, she felt he was judging her. This ride was a lot bumpier, and Carolina felt motion sick. Noticing her condition, Edward opened the windows to make her feel better with some fresh air. They just met and hadn't known each other for very long, but her impression of him was not the bloodthirsty prince as he was known. He seemed more like a gentleman. Carolina thanked him and apologized for the imposition. However, Edward said he should be the one apologizing for not providing a standard carriage. With Carolina feeling better, Teodor got to discussing plans moving forward. First, regarding her engagement and the reveal of her marriage, they plan on making a grand announcement at the Founders' Day Fete in 2 weeks. Furthermore, the wedding will take place 2 weeks after that, making it about a month from now. Hearing this, she was a bit distraught. Carolina wondered if the likes of her could really pull this off in so short of a time, but she already decided that she wouldn't run away anymore. It wouldn't be too late to lament this even after she's given it an honest try, so she promised to give it her absolute best. They set up a camp at night, and one of the knights came to apologize to her. He didn't imagine it was pleasant for a noble to camp out like this. He suggested to Edward and Teodor that she should at least stay at the inn in town, but Teodor shot her down, saying there were too many risks involved. She appreciated his consideration and asked for his name. Colette introduced himself and felt so honored that she'd asked for it. The knights were called to assemble after multiple bandits were spotted near the clearing to the south. As everyone got into position, Colette told Carolina to remain inside the carriage before drawing his sword and rushing into battle. The bandits fired a rain of arrows on them, and it managed to shatter the glass of the carriage. Fear filled Carolina. She wondered if she'd die here without fulfilling her duty or ever repaying her father. As fire engulfed the carriage from both sides, it looked like this was her end. Carolina hoped her father would forgive her for being such an insolent daughter. Bursting the door open, Edward refused to let her resign herself to death like that. She was his bride. He carried her out, explaining that the fire magic he unleashed to protect her was stronger than he expected, causing the flames to spread to the carriage. One of the knights then came to inform him that Colette had seriously been wounded. In the tent, Ron was doing his best, applying hemostasis and healing magic, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Edward asked him to continue while he'd fetch Tail. He also asked Carolina to stay here since this was the only tent with a barrier in place. However, although he didn't want her seeing any of this, believing she was far too young, but she told him she wanted to face Colette's injury earnestly and see him through, she didn't wish to avert her eyes. As Edward agreed and stepped out, she prayed to anyone who would listen to save Colette's life. Suddenly, a bright green light filled the room, shocking even the medic. It would seem that Carolina's prayers prayers reached someone. Not even Ron's magic should be able to mend such a grave injury. By the time Edward returned, Colette made a full recovery. Ron wasn't so sure of the details himself, but he explained that the moment Carolina offered her prayers, Colette's wounds suddenly started to heal. Carolina said it wasn't her doing because she didn't have any magic powers. That was the diagnosis she received during her magical aptitude test when she was young. Later, Edward thanked her for watching over Colette without shying away. He initially took her for a delicate duke's daughter who was raised in the lap of luxury, convinced that she wouldn't have what it takes to see a man to his death. For misjudging her, he apologized. No one's ever said anything like that to Carolina before. This only made her more certain that Edward was incredibly kind. In truth, she was the one who misjudged him. Carolina accepted his apology and asked him to raise his head. A prince must not bow so readily. Going back to the tent, Edward told Theodore that he sent Carolina to another tent. Also, the bandit stragglers had been turned over to the border guard en route to the imperial capital, so there should be no fear of another attack. As for Colette, he was in stable condition, but his blood pressure was extremely low, likely from losing too much blood. So Theodore and Edward agreed that he should be in the carriage. However, Theo felt like having Carolina and Colette in the same carriage together was a bit weird. There were no free big carriages, however. Edward burned the one meant for nobles, but said that in that moment, he felt a surge of power that he couldn't control properly. Theodore said he also felt the same thing. The powers of several other knights even went out of control due to this mysterious influence. There was also a need to investigate the power that healed Colette, which was similar in nature. As for the carriage situation, Edward said Carolina would ride with him on its horse. The following day, their journey continued. Edward offered to slow down if the ride was too rough for Carolina, but she was fine riding in his arms. At that moment, they arrived at the border of the Malcosian Empire. Before long, they crossed the border and arrived in the imperial capital of Malcosius. By then, Colette was back on his feet, and Carolina and Edward moved from the horse back into the carriage. Their journey, seemingly both so long and so short, would be over soon. He offered to take her on another one sometime if she didn't mind. Thinking it was nice, she decided to reciprocate, saying she'd love to go on another and would enjoy seeing the sights with him again. Soon after, Edward and Carolina were before his imperial majesty, Eric Ruby Martinez. He's renowned as the strongest spell sword there is, a formidable warrior who's repelled countless foes by manipulating lightning, which is a high form of fire magic. He's known as the Lightning Emperor, a title derived from his signature lightning magic and status. Then there's the current empress, Vanessa Ruby Martinez. She's a rare wielder there of frost magic, extraordinary even on a global scale. She's known as the Frost Witch. Empress Vanessa once repelled a powerful monster to save her people. That ordeal was how she won their hearts. Standing before them, Carolina's stomach hurt. Seeing how nervous she was, Edward assured her she'd be fine. They both graced themselves, and Emperor Eric commended his son and also welcomed Carolina with open arms. Ben invited her to have lunch with them, wanting to get a good talk with his son's future wife. Outside, they sat at the table, and all eyes were on Carolina. On the way over, just in case something like this happened, she asked Theodore to teach her some table manners. She feared they might send her back to her country if she made a mistake. With her only eating vegetables, Vanessa asked if nothing else was to her liking. Carolina didn't particularly have any likes or dislikes, but ate a bit too much for breakfast. The Empress asked her to speak if anything displeased her or if she preferred to dine indoors. If the problem lay with them, they'd make every effort to correct it. Eric also encouraged her to speak up. After all, she was going to be part of their family from now on. Carolina couldn't believe they saw her as family already. She was such a fool, feeling all scared in front of such kind people. So she confessed that she felt nervous with them staring at her and apologized for worrying them. But the emperor couldn't help but stare because Carolina was going to become his darling daughter. He wanted to get a good look at her. They've only ever had boys. Even the empress couldn't help her delight at the thought of having a daughter. She thought Carolina's eyes were beautiful, just like Eric's and Edward's hair. In their country, the ruby gemstone holds a special significance. The first emperor gave the royal line its name so that they too could receive the blessing of the ruby. Vanessa felt this was fate and proposed that the wedding ring should be ruby as well. Carolina teared up, overwhelmed with emotions at their kind words. After being taken into her room, Carolina was introduced to her maid Marissa and her bodyguard Owen. Owen was a member of the Pieborn Order of Knights, and also the second son of a baron. Theodore then mentioned they'd begin her lessons tomorrow, and by the beam in his eyes, she felt she was in for something scary. Carolina's instructor for etiquette and manners was none other than Empress Vanessa. This was her first time being an instructor, but she would give it her absolute best. Soon enough, she decided to call it a day, and Carolina was relieved. Vanessa felt she was moving too quickly. She got carried away because Carolina was such a fast learner. Carolina's memory was on the good side. And what was truly admirable was her eagerness to learn. Vanessa had no doubt she was a brilliant student. The next day, she was ready for more of Theodore's lessons. He told her that Edward would also be attending today's lessons, and to her surprise, he was already seated in the class. The lesson for today was about magic. Theodore asked Carolina when she underwent her last magical aptitude test. She said only once when she was young. Whether or not one possessed magical power along with their affinity for specific magical attributes was innate. It is said that this is all determined at birth, but however, Theodore claimed it was a big misconception. This is because magical powers in childhood are extremely unstable and prone to fluctuations. That's why here in the Melosian Empire, it's mandatory for everyone to undergo the magical aptitude test at age 5 and again at 16. Theodore told Carolina she should consider a checkup once things settled down after the Founder Day's fate and wedding. Maybe there was hope for her. That said, despite being magic users, there were still those who couldn't control their power and did things like accidentally setting carriages ablaze. He's hinting at Edward. Either way, Theodore needed to discover the cause of the mysterious force. In addition to that, another curious phenomenon was the lack of monster encounters on their way back from the expedition. Carolina asked if they often encountered monsters. She rarely went anywhere far from the royal capital or the Duke's territory, so she'd never seen a wild monster before. Edward and Theodore couldn't believe their ears. Apparently, there were no monsters even within the royal capital or the Duke's territory, though they had monsters intended as pets for auction. But Carolina had heard of monster-related incidents before her time. Nowadays, though, they were unheard of. Theodore believed this was a blessing of the saint's power. As Carolina left after class, Owen said it was a rare sight to find Edward, who hated a study, sitting in on a lecture. Rumor has it when he was little, Edward always snuck out of class to go train with a sword. Owen supposed the commander had cheated on the mandatory exam. That's when Colette showed up behind them, and Carolina was thrilled to see him. He then warned Owen that if he wasn't careful, he could easily be charged with lèse-majesté. Both of them started arguing. At that moment, Owen sensed an assassin about to shoot Carolina and warned her to get down. Luckily, his magic shield blocked the bullet in time, and when Carolina opened her eyes, she was beyond frightened and scared. The knights got to work investigating. Owen had Carolina perfectly secure, but she could not leave the room. He pointedly told her it looks like they were trying to cause liability issues by hurting her. Carolina didn't know what he meant by that. It looks like no one told her. Edward rushed into the room, shoving Colette out of the way. He had to make sure his bride-to-be was okay. Theodore told him to calm down, though. He might hurt her with his brute strength. The new couple were both a bit red in the face. Carolina was somewhat surprised he was worried about her. They all sat to discuss what happened. The shooting in the breezeway between the palace and the Knights' headquarters. Carolina felt thankful for Owen's protective barrier. Theodore decided from here on lessons would be held in Carolina's private chambers. If they remained in the palace, the assassins wouldn't likely lay a hand on anyone. Tale apologized for placing her in harm's way in the first place by having her come out here, and he swore to find out who attempted to attack her. He then presented her a letter from Duke Raymond, her father. It read, "To my beloved Carolina, have you gotten used to life in the Empire yet? I've been beside myself with worry ever since you left the kingdom. Before I knew it, I found myself constantly fretting over you. Now that I'm changing subjects, but the kingdom of Celestia has been awash with ill tidings as of late. King Nathan didn't understand why their crops were growing at abnormally slow rates. Worse, there have been 10 monster incidents in such a short time. He thought everything was under control thanks to Lady Flora's holy magic. Nathan was sick of all the bad news, but the Duke told him not to avert his eyes from reality. A plague outbreak began with origin and treatment methods still unknown, likely due to contamination of the water or air. Nathan relayed the important orders to deal with things, emphasizing a treatment of the plague. This was all too much for him. Meanwhile, Flora was crashing out, biting her nails over the fact her holy magic was weakening. Her healing has weakened dramatically, and the crops were all withering, all in spite of her holy spells. She felt terrible of the idea of disappointing her father, just thinking about how he's always told her magic is influenced by the caster's mental state. He thought she must be nervous with the upcoming saintly trials, and perhaps she was lonely with Carolina gone. He thought the two of them were so close, and she struggled, but ultimately told him indeed, if only Carolina were here at a time like this. Putting on that act really pissed her off. If not for the public eye, she wouldn't have spent a single moment with that wench. Iris reminded her she needed to focus on the trials. Flora knew she had to find the cause of her troubles soon. Continuing the letter, Raymond told Carolina everything was fine and everyone was doing well. He'd be accompanying the king to the Founders' Day Fit and see her then. And so the days passed until the Founders' Day Fete finally came. Carolina was impressed by her maid's makeup job. She found looks dashing as he complimented her beauty. Their form of bashful flirting was a bit much for Tail, and he told him they should get a move on. The new royal couple would be announced in and walk together with Oo and A of the crowd, and of course the typical jealous, annoying women. Following them was older brother, His Imperial Highness, Prince Gilbert Ruby Martinez. Now the crowd really awed over his beauty. Edward questioned if Carolina preferred someone like his older brother. The other ladies fancied Gilbert over Edward. He thought of himself as too unfriendly. Carolina told Edward she found his kindness and reliability far more charming, though. He took her for a strange one. Then finally, the Emperor and Empress came, and everyone was silent except for a solemn chant of glory to the great Malcosian Empire. The Emperor's voice commanded presence as he thanked them all for attending today's party. He was happy to declare Edward and Carolina's official engagement in front of everyone. Carolina felt relief. She expected more backlash, but everyone seemed to be taking it well. The Emperor called for a toast and everyone raised their glasses. Edward politely asked his fiancée for her companionship. She told him likewise to an everlasting bond. Everyone swarmed to try to get a word in with the newly betrothed, but Gilbert would cut the line. He had a pleasant private chat with the two, and while he was doing better, he wasn't completely cured. The symptoms were being suppressed by the Pope's divine powers temporarily. The Pope told him his conditions were worsening by the day. If he were to leave the Diamond Palace without his protection, Gilbert would surely collapse. Things seemed grim for a moment, but Gilbert put it aside. He didn't want to ruin the celebration. He congratulated them on their engagement before taking off. Raymond would shortly make a visit to his daughter. Edward will leave the father and daughter so they could catch up on things. Her father commented on how nice Edward seemed. Rumors were not always to be believed. Carolina added, he was kind, considerate, and gentle. She's proud to be his bride-to-be. Owen suddenly bursted into the room, telling Carolina to get away from her father, claiming he was the one who tried to kill her. Carolina thought there was no way. Tail asked Owen to explain himself. Owen threw down an apprehended man who tried to poison Carolina's drink, and when interrogated, he confessed being hired by Duke Raymond, but Carolina would inspect the culprit herself, and this confirmed her father was not guilty. The man had black hair and pale purple eyes. He's in East Goan, a land located to the east across the sea. Malcosius only just initiated relations with them. Since Celestia is a small nation, they had neither the means nor capital to interact with East Gosh. Owen fell to the floor. He was so embarrassed being fooled by such a transparent lie. The Duke made it clear no father would want his own daughter dead. Owen felt bitter. Raymond thought nothing of it, though. He knew the knight was acting in Carolina's best interest. Afterwards, Theodore asked Carolina if she's noticed anything amiss. Was there a reason she's being targeted? Carolina just assumed it's because she was Edward's fiancée, but Teao said no. To the public, she was nothing more than an emissary from Celestia. Everything here now revolves around the succession of the Malcosian throne. With this country having two princes, Edward thought his more intelligent, more sociable older brother surely would have succeeded. However, his illness has robbed him of his future. His condition is called mana hypersensitivity syndrome, a disease normally one contracts as a child and clears up by adulthood. But for Gilbert, his condition is only worsened. His body is unable to withstand his overflowing mana, and day after day, he's plagued by nausea and dizziness. That's why Edward was so surprised today. Normally, his brother isn't able to set foot outside of the Diamond Palace. It's the only place that's safe for him, thanks to a special barrier in place. Because he hasn't been making appearances in high society, there are those who've grown wary of Prince Gilbert, and at the same time, Prince Edward began to distinguish himself in battle. Voices rallied for him to be crowned prince. prince. Edward had no interest, though, and T thought it made sense. He's a musclehead with no grasp of politics. For these reasons, two factions have emerged: First Prince and Second Prince faction. Of course, some within the First Prince faction take extreme measures, such as the terrible rumors about Edward. However, it was true Edward indeed cut down an innocent woman and child. It happened when they were defending a town to the east. The woman ran towards the injured with an explosion spell that had been planted inside hers and the child's body. She was likely an activist from an enemy nation. Edward had no choice but to cut them down, and the thoughts still traumatized him. Everyone else was saved, but the First Prince faction exaggerated the incident in their reports, claiming Edward was a cruel prince who'd slain an innocent woman and child. Carolina told him he did nothing wrong. He was baffled, but her reassurance eased him in a way. Teao then explained Owen's situation next. There are 4 criteria one must meet in order to be selected as a Shiovalic bodyguard: noble birth, the skills appropriate, that their family doesn't side with the First Prince faction, and they must firmly believe nothing is more important than the Night Order. If something mattered more to them, they could be extorted. Teao had no attachment to money, status, family, or even his own life. He's the bastard son, born a Baron Klein and a maid. His father's wife would often beat him. She wanted her own son, Drake, to be the one to inherit House Klein. Owen hated everyone in the family, but he was grateful to his father for taking him in, until the day he decided to come home after being absent for a long time. Owen wanted to show him how much he's grown, and all his father said was, "Ah, Owen, the child I had with that me." Owen was shocked. His father took him in case anything were to happen to Drake, but now he saw no reason to keep Owen alive. Baron Klein sparked up his fire magic, saying he'd kill Owen himself. That's when Owen realized his own father thought of him as nothing more than a low-life commoner. However, when his father struck, Owen deflected it and ran away crying. The story of Owen's past was beyond Carolina's imagination. After being nearly killed by his own father, she was sure Owen was desperate to save her. Colette could tell she was down about Owen, but he had no intent to return to his duties as a bodyguard knight. Colette asked her to furnish Owen's room with her unfinished handkerchief. For a knight, a gift from the person they've sworn to protect is an honor in itself. A finished handkerchief bears the meaning, "I am grateful for your wonderful work." An unfinished one means, "Though you may be inexperienced, I hold high hopes for your future." Colette believed Owen didn't have the means to change. As an empty man, he lacked the strength to move forward. He thought Owen could move forward with the handkerchief. She'd pay him a visit in the interrogation room. He was stunned to hear Theodore told her of his past. She saw his point of view. Owen was betrayed by a loved one and felt nothing mattered anymore. Owen denied her empathy, saying it must have been real nice for her to grow up in a loving family. He thought she couldn't understand, but she did. Her mother passed away, giving birth to her. Her sister resents her, saying, "If only mother were still alive instead of a disgrace like you. If there hadn't been someone that needed her, perhaps she would have been left unable to move forward, just like Owen." She may have lived her life resenting the world. She presented him with the handkerchief and asked that he serve her once more, not for anyone else, but for his own happiness. And if he did, she'd support him all the way. He got down on one knee and pledged his sword and loyalty to her, vowing to protect her until his life withered away. All the while, Laura was still losing it over her failing arcane power. She couldn't blame her sister's absence as the cause anymore. Her father wasn't helping either. She heard Carolina's engaged and happy now when she thought her fiancé was supposed to be a brute who cut down women and children without hesitation. She then realized the start of her powers weakening coincided exactly when Carolina left the country. And worse yet, a nefarious religious leader wanted to take advantage of the chaos going on to dominate Celestia Kingdom and take over everything. Since the engagement between Carolina and Edward was declared, their wedding is now fast approaching. Carolina's maid confirmed today's schedule with her. At 10, she'd be joined by Prince Edward for planning the wedding, followed by a fitting and alterations for the wedding dress. The clock striking 10, Edward entered and cut through the stuffy formalities. He told her their wedding would be standard. However, her father was not available to attend. Carolina figured that was the case with all that was happening back in Celestia. Instead of a bridal walk, the bride and groom would make their entrance together. Carolina got so flustered, but Edward wanted to make it clear he had no intention of letting her walk by herself. He couldn't bear the idea of his bride walking alone while he still got to walk with his father. Carolina felt her wedding dress was so beautiful she was almost ashamed to wear it. They couldn't doll, though. The Empress was waiting on them. Carolina needed to get fitted right away. She was shy. The Empress told her it wouldn't do. Carolina's waist is slimmer than she imagined. She detailed the designer on all the things the dress needed to best accentuate Carolina. Edward came in and things were still shy, but he was confident enough to tell Carolina she looked beautiful. Marissa told Carolina to relax, but she was a bit beside herself after hearing the whole wedding would be broadcast across the empire. Marissa told her she's been working tirelessly all the way up to this point and spoke words of confidence to give Carolina the boost she needed. When she met up with Edward, he told her she looked so beautiful, it's almost a shame he had to show anyone else. They went into the hall. The people clapped and cheered, many saying they were truly a match made in heaven. Carolina's only regret was that her father wasn't here, but she knew he was thinking of her. Everything else was what you'd expect in sickness and house for richer or poorer. To love, honor, and cherish. Edward placed the ring on Carolina's finger. She thought it was so beautiful. As of today, her residence was now the Emerald Palace. Princess Carolina was astonished. The value of the furniture alone was worth enough to buy a small country. Edward entered to tell her in 3 days they'd leave in the morning to set off for their honeymoon. Carolina thought it was a bit too soon. But you see, Edward's mother has been pressing him to get busy. And Teo quickly arranged the schedule. Even though Edward was always busy with the nights, it wouldn't look good if the newlies didn't go on their honeymoon. They'd be visiting Count Kissinger's estate. The cool climate made for a pleasant state, and the Count himself is deeply understanding of the Pie-born knights. Marissa doesn't seem to be reacting well to this. They'd be using Tiao's teleportation magic to go there. Marissa never imagined her family home would be the prince and princess's honeymoon destination. She revealed Count Kissinger is her father. Carolina thought it would be short notice imposing on the Count and wanted to make it up by giving Marissa something she'd like. Marissa liked books, especially Cinderella. Carolina wanted to get it for her, but wondered why Marissa's eyes seemed so sad. Marissa told Carolina not to trouble herself. Her master's sentiments were more than enough, but still, Carolina did not feel great about it. They teleported right over within an intense beam of light. Count Kissinger's estate is best known as the most beautiful mansion in all of the Northeast. The morning scenery is said to be especially spectacular. Small talk with Marissa was still sad, however. The Count welcomed them into their home with open arms. He seemed gentle, but was Marissa not happy to see him? By evening, Edward had to leave Carolina behind to meet with Tao. This worked just fine for her. She decided to take a stroll in the garden. It was there she asked Owen why Marissa seemed sad while he didn't know the details. He heard Marissa didn't get along with her older sister. They'd be interrupted by a shrieking woman. Marissa's sister, who knew Marissa and Theodore, were here. She demanded to see them immediately. When Carolina entered, Marielle rudely asked who they were, and Edward made it clear that she's his wife upon hearing he'd be staying here. The sister skipped out on her vacation with her mother to come here at once. She really wanted to see Tale for some reason, but Edward had no intention of letting her see him. The Count came running out, commanding her to go to her room. She wasn't allowed to leave either. She'd pout and walk off. Count Kissinger then apologized on her behalf and told Edward he'd have his daughter back with her mom first thing in the morning. Tao came out to explain Marielle was the second eldest daughter of House Kissinger. She harbored one-sided malice for Marissa and somehow found out they'd be staying here, which she was supposed to be gone. Marielle is also Theodore's ex-fiancée. The reason Tao originally agreed to marry her was simple. It was so the Pie-born would have access to an abundance of resources. There were some nobles who refused to sell their goods to knight orders that included commoners. Thus, how Tao's plan came to be. At first, they proposed a contract to purchase goods at twice their value, but the Count wanted to see his daughter married. So, in exchange for his estate offering goods at half price, Tao got engaged on the condition that their contract stand indefinitely. But Marielle's obsession with him was overwhelming. She'd show up at his house day in and day out. It started affecting his work to the point he even thought about throwing her out to sea. Back then, he became a total mess. It was too much to bear. So he broke off his engagement to Mario and proposed that he marry Marissa instead. They're actually engaged right now. But because of that, Mario became harsher towards Marissa than she already was and strained their relationship further. Marissa didn't blame him, though. Her older sister has always disliked her. There was the time she poured tea all over her and said, "Why, I'm sorry, my hand just slipped." Both her eldest sisters despised her and harassed her when they could. Marielle got so pissed. Hearing Theodore broke off their engagement and decided to wed Marissa. She slapped her and called her a little. Marissa pleaded with her parents to let her leave home. Becoming a maid allowed her to put distance between them. She had no complaints, but Carolina didn't believe her. She knew all too well the pain of harsh treatment from her own flesh and blood. Even trying to keep distance family ties entangled him just the way thorns do. She wondered how much Marissa suffered. During tea time, one of the knights came running to Edward. There's been a monster sighting in the western part of the forest. Edward and Tao decided to go investigate the site. Marielle would suddenly come out of the bushes, leaving shivers down Marissa's spine. The monster was just a ruse to separate them from Prince Edward. She came here to tell Marissa to decline her engagement with Tale. A vulgar woman like her wasn't fit to be his fiancée. Carolina could see Marissa shaking. It's just like what she's been through. Carolina stepped forward, thinking about all the support Marissa's given her since her time here in Malcosius. Marielle began shaking, and Carolina confronted her. She said Marissa was not fit, but what about her, to fit her own desires? She fed a false report to the Pieborn, stirring unnecessary trouble for Edward and Tale. Carolina's also heard the Count has had a hard time dealing with her daily conduct. Marissa thought about how Carolina was normally so cheerful and gentle. She's never really been good at asserting herself, but here she was speaking on her behalf. Carolina wasn't going to allow anyone to insult her precious maid. Marielle became bitter. She muttered that Carolina was nothing more than a disgrace from some backwater nation and shouted, "She's nothing but an ornamental wife for the barbaric second prince." That's when Marissa struck her sister's face directly. Marielle got pissed and tried to strike back, but she'd back away from a sudden fireball. Edward was enraged by all the things he heard her say about his wife. To make matters worse for her, Tao told her directly the idea of her becoming his wife made him want to retch. A big blow to her pride, and they'd have her taken away. Afterwards, Carolina and Marissa shared an empathetic moment. Marissa reminded her when she mentioned she liked Cinderella. Cinderella endured all the abuse she got from her stepmother and sisters every day, but in the end, the prince comes to her rescue. Marissa always longed for that kind of story in her own life, but it never happened. However, today, she felt as though she's finally been saved from suffering. Shortly after, the Count sent Marielle to a convent. He wanted to spare his daughter for being charged with insulting the imperial family and obstructing a knight order. Meanwhile, Flora dropped her bass and demanded Iris clean it up immediately. The second exam of the Sydney trials is tomorrow, yet she couldn't even purify the muddy water in the vase. Nothing was going right. Disease was spreading. She didn't want to admit it, but it's just as she suspected. Carolina is the saint. Tao explained to Carolina she'd be undergoing her magical aptitude test again, as per how they did it here a second time at the age of 16, and she'd be taking it tomorrow. Arriving at the venue for the test, Carolina met with a priest who would perform the test on her. He placed a book on the table and told her to place her hand on it and chant, "Reveal unto me my own true measure." If she had aptitude for the arcane, the book would indicate so, and if she was without arcane energy, the pages of the book would remain blank. She seemed nervous, but Edward told her not to pressure herself. Whether or not she possessed arcane power was a small matter. As Carolina placed her hands on the book and chanted the words, a bright light suddenly burst forth. Shocked, Edward asked the priest what this meant, but this was a first for the priest as well. Upon opening the pages of the book, Carolina was shocked to see nothing written inside. Edward comforted her, saying it didn't matter if she didn't have magic. Theodore cut him off, insisting that it was impossible. He was certain that Carolina should possess arcane power and asked they run the test again. At that moment, Melvin Clark White, known as the 39th High Pontiff, entered the room. He said he would affirm the test results and confirmed that Carolina did not possess any arcane power. However, what she possessed was a special kind of power distinct from the arcane. He bowed before her, feeling honored to meet the beloved child of God. Meanwhile, Flora somehow managed to make it through the first round of trials. But her problem starts here. She graced herself before Jonathan Mills, the sole Archbishop of Celestia. In truth, he's a scumbag who only cares about filling his pockets and self-preservation. A container of muddy water was placed before Flora, and she was asked to purify it into fresh water. As someone whose success was guaranteed from birth, she believed failure was not an option. Despite putting in her best effort, she couldn't accomplish it. In the end, her hypothesis was correct. This decline in her arcane power and the various calamities occurring throughout Celestia all involved Carolina, the true saint. Melvin told Caroline that she possessed the power of divinity. Though his divine power pad in comparison to hers, her divine power is constantly overflowing, almost as if it were a waterfall. One might say she couldn't contain it. divinity had three main effects. There was its healing ability, which treated illness and injury. Its purification ability, which enriched barren land and cleansed contamination. In other words, Celestia's prosperity, up to this point, was thanks to Carolina's divine power. There was no doubt her power could impact the entire country. As for the third effect of her divinity, it was the ability to amplify the arcane power of others. The holy magic Flora thought she possessed all along was enhanced by Carolina. Jonathan demanded to know the hypothesis she came up with, offering to let her decide the reason she failed this test. That way, she could keep up appearances with the public. Laura only cared about maintaining her image, so she agreed to tell him what she thought. Meanwhile, Melvin reasoned that Carolina was most likely using her powers obliviously. Monsters were averse to divinity, and the purification of crops and water could be done subconsciously. He explained that she could activate the healing or amplification abilities through emotions. Feelings like, I want to save someone or I don't want to die. Divine power activates in response to such emotions. That explained the reports from the knights whose arcane energies had gone haywire. It was thanks to Carolina's powers all along. Melvin never dreamed that he would meet anyone with such divine power. With powers like hers, he felt she could even heal Prince Gilbert. But Theodore said it was best not to announce anything about her divinity yet. Not only were possessors of the divine rare, but they also harbored great power. He couldn't imagine that other countries wouldn't take notice. Edward decided it was best to wait until Celestia's domestic issues settled down before making any announcement. Arriving back at Count Kissinger's estate, the Count introduced them to a man from their domain's top jewelry shop who wanted to present his goods. The jeweler displayed gemstones he selected, which he thought were most befitting of the royal family. Carolina's eyes darted towards the one that had the same color as her sister's eyes. She decided to take the tanzanite and paribra tourmaline, telling the jeweler to put away the pad parasa sapphire, while she stared into the starry night and rejoined her, apologizing if there was any cause for offense. He asked if she hated her older sister because he recalled her reaction when she saw the sapphire. Irina always spoke fondly of her father, yet never of her older sister, and Edward didn't think she was the kind of person who would hate anyone without just cause. He wanted to know her reason and to be the one who supported and understood her best. So he begged Carolina to tell him everything about herself. With her hands trembling, she said she didn't like Flora. She hated her. On the surface, Flora acted like a kind older sister, but she was always making fun of Carolina behind her back, calling her a disgrace, a stain on their dollhouse more than anyone in the world. Carolina hated her older sister. Edward comforted her, vowing to always protect her, so he told her to cry and let it all out. Carolina wished she had met him sooner, and so did he. She then spent that moment in his arms, crying her heart out. The Emperor and Empress felt blessed to hear that their darling daughter-in-law was blessed with divine power, and they felt very proud. Carolina then asked if there was a way to cure Prince Gilbert's illness. She thought there was a way she could help him. The idea was great. However, Teeter pointed out that treating mana hypersensitivity syndrome required great delicate skill. But he asked Carolina if she was ready for the road ahead. Following that, she began her training session to get accustomed to handling her divinity. As she gathered the divine power in her hands, Theodore told her to apply it to the potted plant. Once she did so, the plant bloomed instantly. However, Carolina would suddenly drop to her knees. She felt exhausted, so Theodore decided they should call it a day here. If Gilbert could be cured, Edward wouldn't have to worry about the succession dispute anymore. To that end, she was ready to do her best. Gilbert had been raised as the next emperor for as long as he could remember. However, his mana hyper's sensitivity syndrome, which is supposed to get better with age, only grew worse as he grew up. The nobility was divided over who should be the crown prince, and his father was forced to make a tough decision. In the midst of everything, Gilbert's only salvation was getting letters from Edward, and so he entered adulthood, confined to the only place safe for him, the Diamond Palace. The Empress came to tell him about an important announcement. The Emperor declared that the next emperor would be decided before the year was over, but she made it clear that his father wanted him to give a fighting chance as well. But Gilbert wondered what chance they had when they were yet to find a cure for his illness. Vanessa cried, feeling bad for her son, but Gilbert told his mother that he'd be fine. The next day, Carolina was shocked to hear that she'd be assigned to treat Prince Gilbert starting today. Theodore only just heard about it himself. He mentioned that Emperor Eric ordered for Gilbert to be treated and to send him to the Kingdom of Sun using teleportation magic. After all, the best way to get Gilbert back into high society was to have him attend a grand party, especially when hosted by another nation. The resolution of the succession dispute rides on this party. Theodore told Carolina that she had managed to pick up a skill difficult for even the Pope in such a short span of time. She should be proud of herself, and if she still felt uneasy, she need not have faith in herself, but have faith in Theodore. Arriving at the Diamond Palace, Theo couldn't go any further with Carolina, so he left Gilbert in her hands. Carolina was taken to his room and began preparations for his treatment. At the end of the treatment, she would have him use a magical device to verify its effectiveness. If he was able to use the magical device without any complications, it meant the treatment was a success. First, she started by calming herself and feeling the float of the divine power. Next, she began to channel that power. The High Pontiff said that the infusion of divinity didn't need to be very strong. In fact, if it was too much, it could actually prove toxic. Gilbert came closer to her, and she held his hands to start the treatment. As she began hitting him with divine power, it was a lot harder to control the divinity than she had imagined, but she managed to keep her focus. And when it was over, Carolina passed out shortly. Meanwhile, Gilbert was feeling unbelievably great. He hadn't felt this way since he was a child. After using the magical device, he couldn't believe it. It worked flawlessly. This had never happened before. There was no reaction to the presence of mana. Even the Pope couldn't alleviate his symptoms to this degree. Feeling excited, he asked if he could call Carolina Mistress of the Divine. After all, she was his savior. After calming himself, Gilbert told her that he had already given up on becoming emperor. But this moment filled him with joy. Afterwards, Carolina wondered if the treatment was really such a success. Theodore informed her that he safely transported Gilbert to the Sun Kingdom via teleportation magic. With the prince being able to attend the party without issue, they were finally at the starting line of resolving the succession dispute, and it was all thanks to Carolina. Sometime later, Carolina paid another visit to Gilbert, who was clearly delighted by her return. She tried once more to get him to drop the whole mistress thing, but he was stubborn, insisting that the title was rightfully hers. Stepping inside, she noticed the room looked much more organized. Gilbert was all set to enjoy a nice tea time with her, but Carolina had to remind him she was there for work, not refreshments. However, he claimed that the treatment wouldn't even be necessary today. He pulled out a magical device shaped like a butterfly that was constantly active and set it on the table. The fact that he could look at it without being overwhelmed by mana was living proof that her divine power was still working its magic inside him. He assured her it only held a tiny bit of mana, so she shouldn't worry. He even offered to let her have the device if she'd just sit and have tea with him. In the end, Carolina barely did any actual treating. They spent the entire time chatting about their childhood blenders and random stories over tea. She couldn't really wrap her head around what kind of person Gilbert was. The following day, he was just as happy to see her. During the exam, she realized that the divine power within him had completely dissipated. She tested him with the magical device to see how much mana he could detect, and he noted it felt much weaker than before. Regardless, they got back to focusing on the treatment. Weeks went by, and the mana that Gilbert used to see so vividly was now nothing more than a faint glimmer. He offered his formal thanks to Carolina, deeply respecting how someone with such incredible power could remain so incredibly humble. Afterward, Edward came to see Carolina, looking absolutely wiped out. Even so, he still carved up time to spend with her. Carolina gave him the good news that his brother's recovery was moving right along. At this pace, Edward hoped for a total cure, but noticing her face, he asked if anything happened with Gilbert. She tried to act like everything was normal, but Edward could tell something was off. She eventually admitted she wasn't a fan of the mistress nickname Gilbert kept using. Edward was genuinely confused by that. He started to wonder if his brother was harboring some other kind of feelings for his wife. To settle his mind, Edward asked her point blank whose wife she was. She told him exactly what he wanted to hear. She was the wife of Edward Ruby Martinez. He took that answer and headed out. Carolina was left wondering why he'd even asked that. If he didn't just say what he was feeling, she was never going to understand him. Later on, Edward caught up with Theodore to ask about how things were going between his wife and his brother. Theo looked a bit concerned after seeing the expression on Edward's face. He then spoke with Carolina, letting her know they were finally nearing a resolution for the succession mess. However, some nobles caught wind of her daily visits to the Diamond Palace, and nasty rumors started flying around. Since he'd already found the source of the leak, he planned to deal with it immediately. Theo promised her they'd handle the damage control and shut down the gossip. Finally, he mentioned changing the way they were testing Gilbert to see just how much much mana he could handle. They wanted him to leave the Diamond Palace without any divine power in his system. Carolina was worried, but there was really no other way to be sure. Before she left, Tedor gave her a little advice. Don't get too close to Prince Gilbert. There were people who would definitely get the wrong idea and end up hurt. Days later, Melvin stopped by to check on Gilbert. He was impressed by the progress and praised Carolina for her hard work. He was confident that if they kept this up, a full recovery was in the cards. However, he did warn about the chance of it coming back, believing the root of the problem was that Gilbert's eyesight was just too sharp. Mana that's usually invisible would suddenly pop into view whenever those hypersensitive nerves got triggered by something. Even if it was for a test, Carolina hated the idea of Gilbert stepping outside without her protection. But if he was ever going to lead the Empire, he couldn't stay hidden away forever. Theodore then told Carolina that members of the Pyroborn would accompany Gilbert as he stepped out of the Diamond Palace tomorrow. And just to be safe, Carolina was told to accompany him as well. Tedor hoped it would all go well, and the way he said that worried Carolina. The following morning, she arrived to escort Gilbert. At the same time, Edward asked Tedor how Carolina was doing. He was told to ask her himself, but he argued that things were a little awkward between them at the moment. He didn't want to hurt her. Tedor understood he didn't want to hurt someone precious to him. Nevertheless, he said that very sentiment could sometimes wound deeply. It was because they were dear to them that they must clash with them at times. Tedor also told them that Carolina was scheduled to meet Gilbert at the Diamond Palace. With that being said, Edward rushed off to meet her. At the gate of the palace, the scenery looked nothing out of the ordinary to Carolina, but she wondered how it appeared to Gilbert. He suddenly began feeling pain as he saw such a massive amount of mana. Carolina suggested calling off the test, but he wasn't about to give up here. However, pain caused him to lean on Carolina. Edward arrived at that moment, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Gilbert gave him a sinister smile, as if saying, "I'll be taking Carolina for myself." Edward shoved his brother away and took his wife with him. When they got to the woods, she asked what happened and what made him so angry. Carolina wanted to know if she wronged him in any way. Boiling with anger, Edward asked her, "Do you love my brother?" Unlike his beloved brother, he saw himself as nothing but a rugged and aloof man, so he wouldn't blame her for choosing Gilbert. If she wanted a divorce, he would agree, but he let her know how deeply he loved her. Edward loved Carolina more than anyone else in the world. That was why, whenever he saw her with another man, he went insane with worry and jealousy. Carolina also told him that she loved him very much. She held the kind prince who embraced her feelings unlike anyone else first in her heart. On their way back, Edward asked her to just refer to him as Ed and also to drop the formalities. He wished to be like a real married couple with her. So, she agreed and asked him to call her Lena as well, confessing their love to each other. Meanwhile, Gilbert knew he could never have Carolina, so he felt the urge to be a little mean. Turns out he was quite childish himself. Tedor then appeared, telling the prince he'd taken his game a little too far. He pointed out that Gilbert's hypersensitivity syndrome was all but cured by now. Gilbert couldn't fool Tedor's eyes. Despite trying to play dumb, Tedor said he didn't even feel the slightest bit faint after he used teleportation magic, which made Gilbert's charade obvious. He caught on after reading the medical report Melvin provided, which stated that Gilbert's optic nerves had significantly calmed down. Not only that, but it was Gilbert who spread the rumors about Carolina visiting the Diamond Palace. Tedor asked him why he spread those rumors. One could see Gilbert's actions as a way to worsen the relationship between Edward and Carolina, but at the same time, one could also see them as a means to fire up the reserved Prince Edward. Either way, was glad it all worked out in the end. Later on, Gilbert met with Edward and Carolina, apologizing to them for the false reports he made regarding the treatment of his illness. He told Carolina that his illness had long been cured. He also apologized for provoking and angering Edward in front of her. Gilbert then asked them to hear out his one last selfish request. He told Carolina that he loved her and her earnest, kind, good nature. The way she got angry and said, "I was worried." The way she laughed and said, "The flowers are lovely." So he asked her to smile at him. Carolina made it clear that she couldn't return his affections because the only man she loved was Edward, and she'd never love another man so long as she lived. With that, Gilbert was relieved that she put an end to this love. So he left Carolina in Edward's hands. He hated to admit it, but he knew Edward was the only one who could make Carolina happy. Meanwhile, Jonathan paid a sudden visit to King Nathan and Duke Raymond. He told them the cause of their nation's spreading problems was not Flora. Rather, it was due to the absence of Carolina. He mentioned that she possessed divinity powerful enough to influence over an entire nation and provided evidence. He then proposed they take back Carolina for their country. So, they hit us with a semi-unimportant side arc back to the main plot. How many times are they going to do this? Subscribe and let me know if if you hate it or not. But for now, peace.